Everything started on a trip that I planned for months. Me and 3 more people, all longtime friends. We camped from time to time, nothing of radical expedition, but we also were not beginners. We knew how to set up a tent, make a fire, orient ourselves in the woods with a compass. We had good equipment. The area that we chose was known for long trails and for having little movement of tourists. That was what attracted us, actually. No radio noise, no children screaming, no smell of industrial sunscreen mixed with barbecue smoke, only the woods, the silence, and us. In theory, it was perfect. We arrived in the beginning of the afternoon, set up the camp in an open area near a small stream. The sound of the water was constant and calm. We made a fire before it got dark, had dinner, told stories, drank a little. A completely normal night. But already on that first night, before sleeping, I heard something. It was not an animal sound. It was not a branch breaking. It was more like someone walking slowly, calculated footsteps, like when you try not to make noise in a hospital hallway, stepping carefully so as not to wake anyone. I did not say anything to the group. I thought it was my imagination working with the tiredness from the trip. I closed the zipper of the tent and slept. But there is one thing that I did not mention. Before the footsteps disappeared, there was a different sound, very fast, very low. I almost didn't notice it at the time. I only connected the dots much later. It was a laugh, short, muffled. The way we laugh when we are trying not to laugh in an inappropriate place, dry, restrained. I slept convinced that I had heard an animal, but it was not the laugh of any animal that I know.
The next day, we went out to the trail very early. The woods in that region were dense, but the trail was very well marked. There were signs from time to time, and we carried the map on the cell phone besides the physical one. Around the middle of the morning, one of my friends said something that caught my attention. "There is someone behind us." We stopped, stayed quiet. Only wind, only insect sounds. We laughed, continued walking. But around 20 minutes later, he said it again, this time more serious. He said that he kept hearing footsteps when we stopped, as if someone was trying to synchronize the rhythm with ours so as not to be noticed. I started paying attention from there, and I swear that I heard it too. It was difficult to determine. The woods create a strange acoustic environment. The sound ricochets differently. Sometimes you hear something that came from one direction and it seems to have come from another. But it was persistent. Whenever we stopped for more than 10 seconds, there was a residual sound, as if someone heavier than any animal that I know had stepped on a dry branch. Always one step, sometimes 2, never more than that. As if it was learning how long it takes to stop after we stop. We quickened our pace, said it was an animal, that it was probably curious, that if we made noise it would go away. One of the friends started hitting branches and shouting. And then the first thing happened that truly made my hair stand on end. From the middle of the woods, a sound came back. It was not an echo. It was too late to be an echo, and the direction was wrong. It was an answer, from the same volume, from the same intensity, as if something in there had hit a branch too, with similar force, waiting the same amount of time that my friend waited before shouting again.
We stayed quiet. From the middle of the woods, silence. My friend shouted again, differently. Only one short syllable without meaning. From the middle of the woods, the same syllable, different in the voice, but the same length, the same pattern. I looked at my friend. He was looking at the trees with an expression that I had never seen on his face. We did not shout any more. We hurried and did not stop until reaching an open point. We arrived at a clearing with a beautiful view, stopped for lunch. Nobody talked about what had happened. Forced laughs, food, photos. You do that. You try to normalize, because the alternative is to panic in the middle of the woods. But when I got up to throw a piece of paper in the trash that we carried in the backpack, I looked at the tree line behind us. There was something there. I did not see clearly. It was too dark under the tree canopies to see details, but it was big. It stayed motionless for maybe 3 seconds, then disappeared into the vegetation without making any sound. It did not disappear running. It did not retreat slowly. It simply stopped being there. I stayed with that image in my head for the rest of the day, and I kept thinking about how long that thing had been standing there before I looked. On the second night, something changed in the behavior of the woods. The birds that had sung all day became completely silent long before it got dark. It wasn't gradual. It was as if someone had pressed a button. From one moment to the next, nothing. Not even insects. Absolute silence. For those who never camped in dense woods, this does not seem to be a big deal. But for those who know how the forest works, that silence is an alarm. The animals stop making noise when they notice something that they understand as a threat. And the silence is never gradual. It is exactly like that, a button. Because fear spreads fast when everyone around you already knows something that you still do not know. We stayed looking at each other around the fire without needing to say anything. We fed the fire until it became very high. We did not sleep immediately. We stayed in silence, listening. And then we started doing that thing that you do when you want to convince yourself that everything is fine. Low conversations about nothing. The type of talk that you have when you are trying to occupy the space with human noise because the silence outside is becoming too heavy. Someone made a bad joke. Someone laughed louder than the joke deserved. We were trying to be normal. It worked for a while. Around midnight, 2 of my friends went to sleep. Me and another one stayed awake a little longer, feeding the fire. We did not talk about the reason. It was not necessary. Around 1 in the morning, the fire was smaller, and I decided to enter the tent. I lay down, closed my eyes. The type of sleep that does not come, where you stay still pretending to yourself that you are going to sleep, but your body does not lower its guard. That was when the sound came back. Outside the tent. It was not footsteps this time. It was breathing. Slow, heavy, almost rhythmic. The type of breathing of something large at rest, not of something agitated, calm, as if it had settled there beside us some time ago and we had not noticed. And the smell changed too. I cannot describe it in a way that does justice to what it was. It was something between wet earth, decomposing leaves, and something organic, animal, that I had never smelled before. It was not rotten. It was not exactly bad. It was only wrong. The type of smell that your brain recognizes as a threat before you understand why. It entered under the zipper of the tent and took over everything. One of my friends grabbed the flashlight. I put my hand on his arm in the dark and slowly shook my head. He understood. We did not need to whisper anything. Instinct. Do not open. Do not reveal where you are. Do not give a reason to act. We stayed motionless. The breathing outside continued. Regular, patient, without any urgency, as if it had all the time in the world. And then I started realizing something. It changed position. Not abruptly, slowly. Every few minutes, the sound of the breathing came from a slightly different angle. First from the right side of the tent, then more to the front, then from the left side, as if it was walking around slowly, looking from different angles, trying to understand what that structure was, what was inside. It had never seen a tent before. That thought came like that, from nowhere, and I could not remove it from my head anymore.
The movement stopped. The breathing came again from the same point on the right side, near my head, and it stayed like that for a long time. Only that slow, heavy sound on the other side of a thin layer of fabric. That was when one of us coughed. Involuntarily, one of those reflexes that the body makes without asking permission. A dry cough, fast, muffled by the hand over the mouth, but it was already too late. The silence that came afterward was different from the silence before. It was a silence of attention. 3 seconds. 4. 5. Outside, a cough came. Similar, not equal. Deeper. A little longer, as if it had estimated the duration of hours and made a slight mistake upward. The same dry texture, the same impulse pattern, but coming out of a throat that had never made that sound before. Almost correct, but not completely. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed deeply. The heart was beating so strongly that I was afraid it could be heard from outside. We stayed like that for a time that I cannot measure correctly. It may have been 10 minutes. It may have been 30. Time does a strange thing when you are truly afraid. It stops working the normal way. But then, something happened that was worse than the cough. Outside, something, sighed. It was not a sigh of relief nor of tiredness. It was the sigh that we make when we are processing something. Thoughtful. The type of sound that you make without noticing when you are trying to understand a problem. And in that moment, I knew, with a certainty that did not come from reason, but from a much deeper place, that it was trying to understand us. Not as prey, not as a threat, as a problem to be solved. We stayed motionless for even more time. At some point, the breathing became more distant. The smell slowly disappeared, like when the tide goes down. And sometime later, a cricket chirped. Then another one. And slowly, very slowly, the forest came back to life around us. The animals only started making noise again when that thing went away. I did not sleep any more that night. I stayed lying in the dark, looking at the roof of the tent, with one single thing spinning in my head. That cough was not a threat. It was not a territorial roar. It was not a warning for us to leave. It was an attempt, a repetition. It was something that had heard a sound that it had never heard before and wanted to see if it could make it too. And what took away my sleep was not the cough itself. It was the fact that, considering that it had probably never done that before in its life, it had become very good at it. Early in the morning, even before making coffee, 2 of my friends were already outside the tent looking at the ground. There were marks. They were not marks from any animal that any of us could identify. They were large. The footprint was broad, with pressure distributed in a way that suggested weight, a lot of weight. And it was not from forelegs. The impression was bipedal. But the detail that held me was not the size. It was the pattern. The marks were not from something walking in a straight line, nor in circles around the tent the way a territorial animal does. They were marks from something that had stayed still at several different points around the area where we slept, as if it had chosen positions, stayed at each one for a while, and then moved to the next, looking from a different angle, observing from a different point, trying to understand something. We stayed looking at those marks for a long time without saying anything. Then one of my friends said the sentence that broke the silence. "I think we need to leave. Now." Nobody argued. Nobody said that he was exaggerating. Nobody laughed. We took down the camp in record time. We filled the backpacks without organizing anything, only throwing things inside. Anything that delayed the departure was left behind. The problem is that we had 4 hours of trail until the exit point. 4 hours of dense woods, of tall trees, of tight turns where anything could be waiting on the other side. And as much as I tried not to think about it, I kept thinking the following. If that thing had spent the whole night studying us, it knew exactly where we would pass to get out.
We started walking fast, almost running in some stretches, but not completely, because running in the woods is asking to twist an ankle, and any injury there meant stopping. For a long time, nothing. Only the trail, the sound of our own footsteps, the weight of the backpacks. But then it started again. The footsteps behind us. Only this time it was different. This time they were closer, and the interval between our footsteps and theirs was smaller than before, as if it had calibrated, as if it had learned with an entire night of observation what the correct rhythm was to not be noticed, and it had almost gotten there, but not completely. Almost human, but not completely. We accelerated. The footsteps behind accelerated in the same proportion. My friend who was in front murmured without stopping, "Do not look back, do not look back, do not look back." I looked back. There was nothing that I could see, only the trail closing in green on both sides, but the sound continued, regular, patient. About an hour and a half into the walk, at a narrow point where the bushes closed on both sides, the friend in front raised his arm, stopped. We stopped behind him. There was something on the trail ahead, about 20 meters away, in the shadow of the trees, motionless. I cannot describe what I saw in a way that will make sense to you. It was tall, taller than any normal human being. The posture was strange, as if the axis of the body did not follow the proportion that we expect in a human figure. The arms too long, the shoulders at an angle that did not fit. But what disturbed me the most was not the size. It was the position. It was standing in the middle of the trail, facing us, with what I can only describe as attention. It was not the posture of an animal that sees you and freezes for fear. It was the posture of something that arrived before you and is waiting for you, with plenty of time, without any hurry at all. And suddenly I understood. It was not following us. It was walking together with us, studying the rhythm, learning the path. And when it learned enough, it moved ahead. We stayed standing looking at each other for 2-3 minutes, which felt like much more than that. Nobody breathed deeply. Nobody spoke. My friend, who was in the second position, put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed slowly. Only that. Nothing more was necessary. Then something happened that I did not expect. One of my friends, beside me, spoke in a very low voice, almost a whisper. Only 2 meaningless words, the type of thing that we say when we are trying to stay calm. Something like, "It's okay, it's okay." And from the middle of that shadow, from the figure standing on the trail, came an answer. They were not the same words, and not some type of foreign language either. It was a sound, a set of short and muffled sounds that had the length of my friend's words, the vocal pattern, the space between them, the descending intonation at the end, like when we make a statement. It was an imitation, imperfect, disturbing, like hearing your own voice in a language that does not exist. And then, without any sound of footsteps, the figure left the trail into the woods. We stayed standing for 2 more minutes, with the heart beating in the neck. Then the friend in front looked back at us. He was completely pale, said in a low voice, "Go, walk." And we walked, fast, without looking to the sides, without stopping. The last part of the trail we did practically in absolute silence. Every branch sound made me stiffen. Every shadow between the trees was a possibility that I did not want to consider. And in several moments, in the more closed parts, I heard sounds that froze my blood. Fragments,
like pieces of conversation coming from far away. It was not possible to understand the words, but the rhythm was human. The cadence was human. The back and forth of syllables was human. As if something was practicing, repeating sounds that it had recorded throughout 3 days, hearing us beside the fire, tell jokes, argue about which path to take. 3 days of material, and now it was trying to put everything back together. Not perfectly, not yet, but it was learning.
We arrived at the parking lot, threw the backpacks in the car, entered, locked the doors. For a few minutes, nobody said anything. We stayed sitting there, breathing. Then my friend in the back seat said, "What was that?" Nobody answered. Until today, nobody answered. I spent weeks trying to transform that into something logical, animal, person, illusion caused by fear and lack of sleep. No explanation fit completely, because it was not only the figure, it was the behavior. Whatever was in those woods, it was not hunting us. It was not driving us away from the territory. It was not afraid. It was studying us. And the detail that takes away my sleep the most until today is this: how long has that thing been doing this? How many other people passed through that trail before us? How many conversations has it already heard, stored, tried to reproduce, or were we the first ones? And how long does it take for the imitation to become good enough for you not to notice that it is not a human voice, for the cadence to become correct, for, in the middle of the woods in the dark, someone to hear that thing and think that it is someone from the group calling from far away, and answer? I do not go back to that area anymore. None of us went back. None of us talked about going back. But there is one thing that stays with me, one thing that I heard on that last night that I still did not tell anyone. Shortly before the silence outside the tent disappeared completely, after the cough, after the heavy breathing, I heard my name. Not clearly, not articulated, more like the attempt of a sound that still had not found the correct form, like someone who had never pronounced those syllables before, trying for the first time. But it was my name, I am sure.